Hello everyone and welcome to Total Quilter Monthly for August 2018. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator, and in this month we're going to continue on with appliques. So if you haven't watched last month's appliques, which was basic appliques, you want to go back and watch July 2018 and start with that video and then continue on with this one, because I'm not going to repeat a lot of what I went over in that video. So again, this month we're going to be covering some more advanced applique topics. So like I said, last month we covered basic appliques, where we just had this one bunny and we converted it into an applique. And we did that by clicking on the bunny, and we came down here to our one-click wonder for appliques, and we clicked it, and voila, it turned that into a bunny. And like I also explained last month, it leaves the bunny artwork behind. So my bunny artwork is still there. I'm going to actually hide it so we just can't see it. I'm not actually going to delete it, although I could. Let me just go ahead and delete it. I really don't need it. So we're going to go ahead and right click on it and click delete. And here we just now have the applique for our bunny. Now, but we have this other piece of artwork here, this egg, to go along with the bunny. So we also want to make that an applique. And if you look at what this egg artwork looks like, and I'll do that by hiding the bunny for a second, you can see that it goes right up to the edge of the bunny. So I'll turn the bunny back on so you can see. Now I could click this, and I could also turn it into an applique. So let's actually go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn it into an applique. So now I've got two appliques here. And when I look at it on the screen like this, it kind of looks okay. But what you're not really seeing is that this satin stitch here is being duplicated all along this line here where the two have a common edge. We really don't want that. If we were going to do this in the real world, we'd want to stitch out our applique of the egg, and then since the bunny is on top, then we would do our applique of the bunny. And we wouldn't want, when we did the egg, however, to do this last stitch here, because the stitch of the bunny over the top right here is going to cover it just for us, and we don't want to duplicate those stitches. So how do we get rid of it? Let me first of all get rid of my egg artwork, just like I did the bunny artwork. So I'm going to do a right click on it and click delete. So now I'm not bothered by the artwork. I just see my appliques. And the bunny is selected here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually select the egg. And I want the egg to actually stitch out first. And right now you can see here in my sequence view, it is stitching out second. That's because I converted the bunny first. If I'd converted the egg first, it would have stitched out first. But I can fix it easy enough. I'm just going to click on the egg, and I can do one of two things. I can click and drag it up and drop it at the top, which will put it at the top, or I can do a right click on it, and I can come down here to move and say first, and now it is stitching out first. So now it's on top of the bunny. Or actually it's behind the bunny. It's first in the sequence, but that means that the bunny's going to come out on top of it when we stitch it. But we still don't want to stitch this extra line of stitching here. However, what we probably do want to do is we do want to stitch the placement line along here, and we do want to stitch the tack down line around here so we can know where to put our piece of fabric down, and we can know where to trim it so it doesn't extend too much into the bunny. So I want to eliminate the satin stitch here, but I do not want to eliminate the placement or the tack down lines. So how do I do that? Well, the way we're going to do it is we're going to have to break up this applique. So before we do that, we want to make sure that all of our applique parameters are set correctly, because once we break up the applique, we will no longer see this as an applique object. We will see it as two sets of run stitches, one for the placement line, one for the tack down line, and then a steal stitch for the finishing stitch. Now if I want to change the finishing stitch to something else, then I would need to do that first before I break it up. But we're going to go ahead and leave it as a satin for right now. So what I'm going to do to break it apart is I'm going to come up here to my sequence view, right click on what I want to break up the applique, and there's right here break up applique. So if I click that, now what I've got is I've got three different parts. So I've got this line right here, which is my placement line. I've got this set of stitching right here, which is my tack down, which is inset a little bit. And then I finally got my finishing stitch, which is the steel stitch or satin stitch. But you'll notice when I did that break apart, it moved it till being last. So I need to move it back up again. So I can select all these three and move them back up, or I could do the opposite of what I did, which is I'm going to right click on the bunny and I'm going to say move to last. So now my bunny's back in stitching out last. Now the next thing I need to do though is I need to get rid of this extra layer of satin stitching that's in here. So I'm going to reselect that satin stitch so you can see it. And now it's like you can see here, it's just a steel stitch, and a steel is what we call a special type of satin that's balanced along a line. Now remember I told you that an applique in the earlier last month, I told you that an applique is based around a line. So around that line we build our finishing stitch, we build our tack down and our placement stitch. And where all those stitches are in relation to that line is controlled partly by the inset, but in an applique we have some other controls that you can apply to that. So we'll go over those later, but I want to go over right now how we would get rid of this. So you'll remember, and this is important to remember, is that this looks like stitches, but as far as the software is concerned, this is actually just a line. All right, so, and the stitches get generated when we save our stitch file. Now, to go ahead and eliminate this part, we're not going to try and cut it or do anything, slice it or do anything like that. The way we get rid of parts of a line is we do something called splitting the line. And the way we split the line is we come up here to our shape tool with our item selected, our object selected, and when we do that, we are going to see the little points here. Now, I apologize, it's a little hard to see them in the blue on blue, but they are there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come up to where we want to break this apart so we don't stitch this to the first place we want to break it, and we're going to right click on it and we're going to select the item that comes up called split line, and that's going to put a break in this line. And so it looks contiguous still, but it's really not. But as far as stitching was concerned, it really wouldn't matter because all we've got is that one break in the line. But if I come down here, down in this area where I want the second break to be, and I right click and I select split line, now what happens is I've broken my steel stitch, my satin stitch, into two different parts. So you can see I've got this inner part here and I've got this outer part. You can see the little pictures of them here. Now I don't want this inner part, and it happens to be selected. If it's not, you would select it, but I'm going to click it in select mode so I can delete it. And when I do that, I can right click on it and I can select delete. And so now what I've done is I've got my, if I hide the bunny so you can see, I've got my placement line and my tack down line still there for this part of the design, but when it comes time to actually stitch out the satin stitch or the steel stitch, I'm only going to get part of it and I won't double stitch it. Let's take a look at some other advanced applique parameters. So to do that, let's select the bunny, and you'll notice that I did not change this one to a rounded corner. So I can come in here, my corner type, and select round, just like we did the first time, and click apply. I could put my fabric in. One of the other things that's kind of cool about the appliques is that I can choose to generate all three of the normal stitches or only part of them. So I could do the placement line, the tack down line, or the finish line. All right, so there's lots of different ways I can take advantage of that. So another way to do this trick would have been to create an applique object that had just the placement and the tack down, another one that just had the finish, and just break apart that last applique if I wanted to keep all the applique parameters, so I could do that. So why might you want to do that? Because there's a lot of other controls in the applique that we didn't go over. So since this is our advanced appliques, let's take a look at them. They're here in the properties box in the applique extra tab. So here we have some things we can do with the placement line. So we can choose the stitch length of it. Now it's just a placement line, so usually we don't care that it needs to be a very tight stitch. A normal stitch length is pretty good. So 3.5, actually a little bit longer than normal, is pretty good. Offset, this will control how far away it is from the original artwork that we started with. So if it's at 0, it is going to place that line right on the edge of the artwork. If it's a positive number, it will place it to the outside of that artwork, and you can also inset it by putting a minus number. And then the tack down, we have even some more options. So the first option we have for the tack down is the type of tack down. Now most of the time we do a run stitch, but you could also change it to a zigzag if you wanted to have a zigzag stitch. A lot of people like that style of tack down, but you can change it. You have a stitch length, and again you have an offset. So these work the same as the placement line, but this offset is from the original artwork. So you'll notice that our offset is a minus number, so that gives us our tack down slightly inside the artwork, which is where we want it. And for this one, since we're going to be cutting up against it, we want to hold that fabric down real nice. We have a short stitch length of 2 millimeters. Now you'll notice there's two other parameters here, width and density. Well, that would be if you change to a zigzag, they would light up and your other parameters would go away. All right, so here we got control of the width of the zigzag and the density, which is how close the stitches are to one another. So let's just go back to run. So you get one set of commands or the other, or one set of options or the other. And lastly, over here in the applique, again, you've got the width, you've got the density, and the inset, again from that artwork. For a satin stitch, if we were to change to a blanket stitch, you would have a width and a density. So let's go ahead and change to a blanket stitch, and you'll see what that looks like. So here is my density. This is how close the stitches are to one another. So if I change my density from 3.5 to 2 and click apply, you'll see that my stitches get a lot closer together, and the width controls how far in our blanket comes. So this is 4 millimeters. That's pretty far. If we want a nice little short one, we might change it to 2 and click apply, and that'll give us more of a hand look, or more precise look of our blanket stitch. So you have control over all of these. You can play with them however you want. And the last thing you've got is the motif, and you can select any of the motifs, and here you can change the stitch length of it and the size of it, and the inset, of course. So if you wanted to make our rabbit with some kind of a motif, like say a 216, and click apply, you could do that. I'm not sure why you would, but you can. It's a great little decorative way of doing things for appliques. Now you are limited, if you have my decorative quilter 2, to the motifs that come with the program, but if you have Total Quilter, one of the advantages is you can create your own motifs if you want to do something special with that. So that is it for advanced appliques, except for one more topic I want to go over. So to do that, let me get a brand new screen. And I'm going to do that by clicking my new icon, and for this applique I'm going to draw a line. So I'm actually going to draw a little bit of a curve here. So let's say I was creating a piece of an applique just like we did for that partial egg. So let's say I just wanted this outline and I was going to trace it myself with the drawing tools, and so this was my applique line. So I'm going to right click to lock that line in. So what I've got now, what I've created, is an artwork line, and I am going to convert it into an applique by clicking the applique icon. And now I've got an applique, and let's change it to a blanket stitch so you can see what I'm about to show you. So I'm going to change it to a blanket stitch, and you can see I've got the little blanket stitches coming in. And the software tries to put these little in stitches heading towards the center of the design. And it assumes the center is the inside of the arc, or if it's a closed shape, it's going to assume it's towards the center of the closed shape, because most of the time those are the correct directions to go. But what if it's not? What if it needs to be on the other side? How do you fix it? Well, this is kind of a workaround, but trust me, it works. So the first thing we want to do is, before we go crazy setting up our applique parameters, if we see that these are going in the wrong direction, the first thing we want to do is convert this into a run stitch. And we're going to come here to our convert to run stitch icon and click it. All right. And then once we've done that, we're going to flip this horizontally. So I'm going to come here to my flip horizontal and click that, and it's going to flip it. Now you'll notice that it left my original artwork here. So let me actually come over here and delete that so we're not distracted by it. Okay, so I have flipped my applique. It's not an applique at the moment, it's a run stitch. We're going to make it an applique here in a second just by clicking the applique tool one more time. And if we go back to a blanket stitch, now you will see that they go the other way. But our applique, our arc, needed to go in the other direction as well. Have no fear, we're just going to flip it back, and once we've done that, now our stitches are on the outside. So that's how you would correct it if those stitches are going in the wrong place. Or if you were just using a satin stitch, if your placement line and tack down line were on the wrong side of the center line there. So that's the way you would adjust that if you didn't want to go in and change the inset and offset over here in your properties box. So thanks everybody for coming and for watching. I want to invite you to come on back next month when we'll have another exciting topic to talk about for Total Quilter Monthly.